Good day, friends of the Baer Faxt and EXPO Chicago and Independent. We're delighted that you have joined us once again at the Baer Faxt, this time for a lunchtime break chat with Tony Karman and Elizabeth Dee, the pioneering fair directors of EXPO Chicago and Independent Art Fairs, respectfully. The Baer Faxt is thrilled to have corralled two of the leaders in the art fair space, especially as Tony's show opens next week, and I know all of you are going. So thank you guys for making the time to speak with us this week. So today's discussion is entitled Fair Play. The art fair is an ecosystem for collecting, discovering, and supporting the arts, and is a look at where the art fair is now in 2022. Before we begin, the Baer Faxt would like to thank its preferred providers as well as the audience, whether you've come from the Baer Faxt Inner Circle or Art or Expos or Independence. So thanks for being here. The talk will be about 35 minutes, and we're saving time at the end for questions. Thanks to all of those who have pre-submitted. And if a question arises while the chat is going on, just go to the chat box below and we'll get them. All right, so let's get started. It's no secret that in 2020 and 2021, the art fair changed drastically. There was the obvious quagmire of COVID and the economic impact that it created. But prior to COVID, a lot of galleries were rethinking their fair strategies and were reconsidering their fair engagements, and with the thought of scaling back, and collectors were complaining of the obvious fair fatigue. So where are we now? Tony, I think I should kick this one off with you. What kind of challenges and opportunities have you faced for this year's edition?
You know, thank you to the Baer Faxt and everyone for the opportunity, especially with a week prior to the fair, to have this chance. You know, I have to say, I embrace the opportunities and these challenges head on, not only having gone through a 2.5-year wait to happen again, but this reset, that time has allowed collectors, galleries, arts professionals to, as you said, rethink about how much they want to get on that track, but also renew what it means to get back on that track in a thoughtful, important way. An art fair is a convening moment in any city across the world that provides not just the galleries and the artists from that city to engage with the world, but also for a city to open itself. And I think that those convening moments are critical to this ecosystem, this world ecosystem. And after all, after 2.5 years, and I think we saw it in the fall, we saw it early in Los Angeles, and we talked about this earlier. People, collectors, arts professionals, curators, directors want to gather. That's when the magic happens. That's when individuals can share stories about what projects they're going to do, or see artists that they have not seen, or interface with galleries in ways that can't be done over this new digital world. On the other hand, this new digital world has only amplified opportunities for us. So again, I think that was a long-winded start, and I want to give my colleague Elizabeth a chance to respond. But you know, I think that we're going to be talking over the next 25 minutes on lots of very similar topics.
Totally, and I would love for Elizabeth to also kind of jump in and talk about that too.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Raja, and thank you, Josh, for having Tony and I here. It's great to be back again talking about gathering again, and I couldn't agree more with what Tony had to say about the importance of, you know, in real time conversation. You know, the people forget the art market is the result of a consensus-based process. It's very hard to do that only on phone calls and email. So I think I'm really excited. I'm looking forward to Chicago next week. I'll be there. And yeah, just looking at, you know, beyond next week in Chicago, because that's the country's fair is Chicago, EXPO Chicago, and it will be taking place next week. Beyond that, we look into the May New York season, and what's exciting about this year, and it is a direct result of some of the challenges that we just recently went through, and are still in some ways reckoning with, is that now independent, which has been a part of the New York fair landscape for now 14 years, is now one of the biggest fairs in New York. Frieze is actually the same size now as independent. And so we went from choosing to be a bespoke fair that's light on its feet, that isn't kind of heavily weighted with the bureaucracy of trade show culture. And now we have seen, as a result of time passing, trends in how people are buying and moving around the world, also what artists want to see in terms of their work being shown. A lot of people are kind of coming to where we've been for now more than a decade. And so that's kind of a full circle, interesting, surreal thing. I think if you had said, how would it feel if most fairs in the world started to kind of move toward more light on the feet presentations, and independent became the norm, not the exception, I would have laughed. Especially a fair like Frieze, which has a great brand. But those changes have occurred, and in a weird way, they started occurring before the pandemic. The pandemic kind of intensified things, and it's created a lot of challenges. I'm not going to understate how hard that was for everyone, but I do think that it did open up some ways of working that we are personally very excited about, and New York Art Week is one of them. We've established with our fair colleagues New York Art Week, and the reason we established that was because for the first time, all the fair calendar in New York has shifted. So it's not just about scale and scope, which is really interesting, but it's also about when. And it used to be you would have the ADA Fair and Independent in March with the Armory Show, and then Frieze would happen in May, and then that would be the calendar for contemporary. And now you have 4 fairs happening at the top of May. You have Independent, my colleagues at TAFAF, also NADA is happening, and which I'm very excited to see NADA come back in New York. And then we have a new fair called Future Fair. So, and we're all working together. And so that collectively brings 300, 400 galleries to the city that don't actually live and operate here. But it also aligns with the auction previews, Mother's Day weekend. It also aligns with these amazing shows happening at the museums. And New York is a museum town, just like Chicago. And so there's a lot on offer, including the Whitney Biennial, which just opened last night. And so there's, this is the time to reorient the calendar and for everybody to realign across the boundary of nonprofit and for-profit. So the idea of coming together and creating New York Art Week was a great, something everybody wanted to do. We have over 30 New York museums, foundations, fairs, and all 3 auction houses taking part. So it's a very exciting time, and I hope everybody will be in town or plan to come to town May 5th through the 12th.
Absolutely. I want to put a pin on this idea about community and collectivity, and so we're going to come back to that. But I do think we do sort of have to address the most annoying question in the world, which is COVID, right? Tony, I want to kick this back to you, but are we still, we've had fairs internationally that are still in the international fair calendar being shuffled around. The US seems to be moving forward, but what's the deal with COVID these days and its presence in the art fair?
Well, I mean, it's an undeniable consideration. We have to still maintain a safe environment for our audiences. The C word definitely affected me in so many ways. I feel, we're the only fair that has had to postpone twice, and I think, although I could be corrected on that. But we are mindful of the fact that we have to maintain a safe environment. We also are in a very unique place because by CDC or even state or city law, what art fair calendar patrons have become used to over the last 6 years is actually different in Chicago now. In theory, we wouldn't have to go through full vaccination checks and mask mandate. We are going to maintain vaccination checks, and we are going to maintain a suggested mask policy. But I think that we're getting to that place. I hope we're all getting to that place where it's in the rearview mirror of a consideration, not just for an art fair, but just for all aspects of museum going, gallery going, etc. And I think that we're getting to that place now. And I do want to respond to what Elizabeth said. I too will be traveling to New York for that New York Art Week initiative, and it's great to hear and see an individual like Elizabeth and those that have joined with her collaborating in a way that is good for a city. We benefit greatly from that similar ethos where it's not lost on most that have attended either an EXPO Chicago or came to Chicago outside of an art fair. This is a city that likes to collaborate, and I think that's very important to our successes. And back to your initial question, COVID surely neutered a little bit of the activities, which we all know, but we're coming out. I mean, galleries in Chicago have been active, and museums have been active now for several months, and I feel like we're emerging again, and I hope that we take advantage of that emergence in a new time slot in the spring, and I look forward to welcoming everyone.
Totally. And I guess that's actually a good segue into this idea of do you think that with this changed landscape, are larger fair franchises kind of cannibalizing the space for smaller, more independent fairs, or is there kind of space for everybody? And I'll let either of you take that.
I think we have to reset how we're having that fair conversation because, as I just mentioned, Frieze is now a boutique scale fair in America. So that's just the reality. So that makes the big kind of great fairs, EXPO Chicago and Art Basel Miami now. It's really just Tony and Art Basel. And I have to say, Tony is a privately owned organization. He's an owner-operator. He should be the mayor of Chicago in addition to running the fair, as I was saying to Tony earlier, which I really believe. You'll actually think he is the mayor of Chicago when you go to Chicago next week, when you see how everybody is just crowds around Tony and his ability to connect people and bring people together. So it's not a corporation, and yet it has the stature of a global enterprise. So we really are not looking at that paradigm anymore. At least I don't think we are. And the other thing that I love, just to piggyback on some of the things that Tony was saying about COVID, is this enabled, I think both of us, Tony and I talked a lot about it during this lockdown period, enabled us to transform our businesses on a digital level. And there's a phenomenal opportunity that we are both seizing, and he's doing it his way as a major big fair. I'm doing it my way as a consciously artist-centric conversation. But what I think is interesting about it is that we're both really deep diving into the digital space, because we realize that 99% of galleries that are great curators and have phenomenal world-class artists that are being shown in the world's biennials have a hard time telling the story in digital, either for financial resources and allocating them or just staffing resources. And so we are providing an opportunity to tell those stories, and it enables us also to create evergreen content for the galleries that they will use for years and decades to come. So, we're making films right now that tell the story of certain artists that are having solo shows at Independent right now. And even if a collector comes and connects with that artist 10 years from now, that's a film they can always watch that we help co-produce with gallery. And those are the ways in which and I think the Art Basel report that just came out also amplified the importance of online transactions are still way, way, way up than pre-COVID levels. And that's not gonna go away. So I think the fatigue that people are talking about is more about the screen than about the fairs. That would be my short answer to that question.
That's such a great answer. And I was curious though, I mean, like with OVRs and other digital tools, like, is that, you know, in terms of market, is that at all cannibalizing what you guys think that you can offer, or is it all pressing up against that? I don't know, Tony, if you want to take that.
You know, I would say no. I think this immediate thrust into the digital world, not just for the arts community, but for all of us, has allowed a different way to communicate and made sure that there's a depth of programming. I mean, what Elizabeth just said and what she's doing with this legacy programming is extraordinary. It's actually the work of, in some ways, some institutions that now an art fair is doing. And I know that Elizabeth and I both share the most important focus, and that is to make sure that we're mindful of the work that the exhibitors that are participating in our fairs are doing. After all, this industry is built very much on the work of the gallerist, or in our case, when I say an exhibitor at the fair, and they are funding a great deal of initiatives, artist programming, artist exhibitions, and art fairs. And I know that Elizabeth, if I can say this, we both share that it's important to provide the participants in our fairs as much as we can, and in this case, as much as we can extends into the digital platforms that we're exploring and trying to present. After all, we're in the business of making sure that they're taken care of. And again, I'm restating, it's as independents, even though I like that. As independents, we really do put exhibitors first, and these digital opportunities are just an extension of what we do in the physical location.
That's super cool. I mean, I do think about programming quite a bit when it comes to art fairs. And Tony, I know you and I touched upon this when we were chatting. Like, what, I guess, in terms of why does Expo invest so heavily in programming, and like both, and then Elizabeth, if you want to jump in afterwards, like what is the role of programming in an art fair?
I'll make this short. I think it's important. Again, I guess I jump off of what I just said about being mindful of what our contribution is to international discourse. As I've said ad nauseum, we never saw ourselves as a regional fair. We saw ourselves as an international fair that also serves the region. And if we do our job right and create programming that is active and engaging for not just a local or regional clientele or an international clientele, then we have more to offer. And it goes back to supporting our exhibitors. We want to make sure that there's legacy content that it goes far beyond just the 4 days. There's our initiatives that we took on 7 years ago that has grown tremendously, our curatorial forum and now our curatorial exchange, and now our new directors summit convening museum directors in Chicago to have a discussion of what is impacting museums across the country, I think is important to what I hope is a long-standing part of our brand. The dialogues, discussions, the events and programming that we do is all in support of this greater 4 days. And again, to me, I think it's an investment that's important and critical to what Expo Chicago is in this moment. Sorry, I went on a little bit longer than I probably should have, because I want to give Elizabeth that time.
Well, I was just thinking about what you were saying. I agree with you. I think that what you're doing with the programming, with the directors conference, and also just the other thing that you've done with that is you've been able to really bring a lot of support, corporate support, to fly in curators whose budgets, especially since COVID, have been cut. So there are a lot of major curators who just can't come unless they're sponsored, and I think that's something that has been increasingly happening, particularly with the younger generation of curators. They don't have the same kind of budgets that the senior curators have had, and even now, it's just great to have the resources to bring those people to Chicago and to have them be in dialogue with each other. And I'll tell you, it's the reason why a lot of galleries want to do Chicago is they know that they're going to get serious face time with major cultural decision makers on the institutional side. And they know that some of those relationships could be game-changing for the artists that they're championing and advocating for. And it's super important, and I think it's great that it's happening. It also makes EXPO Chicago an international hub where things get decided culturally that impact the globe, and so you have the best of this global, influence and inspiration with the best of a region that is really special as a region. And so in that case, Tony gets to have it all. He gets to be the best of a national and regional, and then he gets to have all the global, reach that is meaningful to that organization. And Chicago, I'm from Chicago. I was born there. It's really important in a space like Chicago to create that, because it doesn't exist. On the flip side, coming back to me in New York, we really don't do that much programming because New York doesn't require that. Because as long as we align with other major art events in the city, it's a global conference every single day that week that we all get to benefit by. And there's so many events. We have 30 museums that are doing events during Art Week. We have 4 fairs. We have 3 major auctions that are going to put on, billions of dollars of contemporary art in 14 days. So there's, everything you could conceivably want to learn, see, experience, or connect with is just at your fingertips. So yes, we do talks, but we try and do it throughout the course of the year. And the situation that we're in is vastly different. So we don't really need to do it in that way. I am envious, though, of the curators and being able to fly them in, because I know there are a lot of important museums that have curators that would love to be in New York for all of that. And maybe that's something that New York Art Week can take on once it kind of establishes itself this year. Maybe that can be something we work with you, Tony, on. There's a lot we could potentially do that is complementary in that regard. But I with programming, my thinking is, if it doesn't add, it's so much work. If it doesn't add value and doesn't elevate what everybody's doing, by a multiple of 3 or more, then just let everyone do what they do in programming every single day in New York City, and it's great. So that's sort of my take on it.
That's a great take.
I'm envious of that place.
Yeah. But I do think that the reality is that both of your fairs are actually doing something different, or they feel quite different, and that's why people are so excited to always engage with them however they do. But I guess one thing that does really stand out to me for both of your fairs is that they are spaces where people can go and collectors can go and curators can go to engage with the market in a way that's both respectful and can support artists, and is also a place for discovery. So how do you make that happen? How can you create that environment?
I guess it's hopefully throwing a good party or a good event. You just hope to create those spaces to allow that to happen. Jumping off of our commitment to curators and directors, we do have back-end programming and symposia that they're going to be involved in. But I've always loved to say, the best part is they get to be in the city and talk curator. And find their places and find their dinners to be colleague to colleague. I think that in many ways we've talked about programming, and we have a lot going on. Just like what I was getting at, what Elizabeth said, there's surely a ton going on in New York, but the spaces that you're talking about, there's a lot of room for that connectivity and that in the space of a city, and I guess we don't try to over-program individuals. We hope that they find those places and find time to also explore outside of the art fair. And I say it's important for collectors and curators and arts professionals to, in our case, to explore the city. There's extraordinary artists that are now living and working and staying in Chicago and have for many years. There's extraordinary galleries that are really participating not just in Elizabeth shows, but also throughout the world and contributing greatly. And I think whether they're participating in EXPO Chicago or not, it's important to me that everyone is experiencing all that a city has to offer, as well as this experience that happens at Navy Pier. And we actually, although I talked about it in the first part, there's a lot of room and space for an individual to explore. I hope that was enough of an answer. Elizabeth.
Yeah, I would, say that when it comes to discovery of artists, either because they're rising and they're emerging, and they may be having their independent debut or their New York debut, or there are lots of, we have kind of always specialized in that. I think people look at independent as a place to see a vetted, very trusted group of rising artists, and we gave Oscar Murillo his first American show in 2014, and I took the Rebels by the hand and introduced them to Stuart Shave, and then they were in the studio the next morning, and then by December he had the main space in the Rebel collection, and then the market just was already blowing up within the first 3 hours of the fair, but there was endorsement and milestones that were created by collectors as a result of having that personal connection that wouldn't have happened online. Those kinds of things. Or Nicholas Party's first American show with Modern Institute, and also I think 2015, which was an aha moment for a lot of our collectors who bought those works at under $10,000 and are delighted now that they had that opportunity, that they had a chance to connect with him when they could make a huge difference to his world, before his market became bigger than all of us. And Donna Huanca, also 2016 solo, debut in America with Perez Projects, the Marciano family, who had the foundation in Los Angeles, came in and said, I know you've been emailing me about this artist, but now we're having that aha moment. Commitment was made. She had a major show there. Like, that was a really incredible thing. And, she's, bigger, her market is bigger than all of us, and rightfully so. And so we have always done that. But the other thing I would point to is artists that have, for one reason or another, been kept from the seat at the table. Either women, which is still, we me being one, it's like we have a long way to go. We're still not there yet. If you read Julia Halperin's report on gender, it's shocking still that with all the women getting the attention now, even looking back to the 1970s and earlier, it's still not a big correction. Artists of color as well, again, just marginalized over decades and centuries from opportunities in this very conservative art world that I think is, so fearful of losing its own power and control in the marketplace. And I think we're changing that, and I think we're agents for changing that. The other thing I would also say is indigenous artists from native tribes that were, never had the opportunity to even be educated. So that falls in, again, to the self-taught category. We brought dealers in who were specialists in indigenous artists and communities, either First Nation from Canada with Fazakas Gallery. Now we have Bradley Erkenstand bringing a Joseph Siga solo show. Those are major, major milestone moments you're going to see in 5 weeks' time in New York from artists that are really getting their due, and they're still young. Audie Murray is doing a show with Fazakas. We just did a podcast with her for the for our online platform. It's great to see these artists get in the conversation, and in a way, I love that Independent has a role to be a platform to force people to look at these artists and to know that this is valid. And I've loved seeing that. Like, I remember Maurizio Catalan coming through the fair. I mean, he's always there every year. It's his favorite fair. But, coming in, with Massimiliano Gioni before he did Venice, and looking at all the self-taught artists, or quote-unquote outsider artists. And, I remember when we started inviting galleries that specialize in this, people would be like, why are you inviting that gallery? That's not an independent, young, hip, gallery from Berlin. And I was like, No, but it needs to be in the conversation with everything else. And I know Matthew Higgs, I have to shout out to him, who's my co-founder, an amazing curator who's helped really push that, not only with his mission with White Columns, which is the oldest nonprofit artist-run space in the city, but also in bringing that forward. And what I realize is now those galleries are celebrated at the Basels and the Friezes and other places, which we really open those doors. And then you go to biennials and you see this emancipation project where these artists really are getting their due, and it may be 30, 40, or 50 years later, and it doesn't matter when it happens, it's that it happens. And I think that you're going to see more and more of that. I mean, this year I could say themes that we're going to definitely see that I was just this morning sitting with Jungju, who's an amazing colleague here, and she's doing all the content with the galleries and doing all the digital content, and it's like, oh my God, there is a disproportionate number of Asian American women in this fair. How did that happen? Like, something's just happened where we're not aware of things that are rising in terms of themes or topics until the fair actually happens. And we're like, wow, that's really interesting. We're gonna have to make sure people connect those dots, And then of course we are this year strong on Indigenous again and artists of color again, and I'm thrilled with that. But then we also have this interesting, from the emerging artist side, kind of a commonality around the concept of the body. And and beyond figurative painting, almost like how the body relates to technology, or how the body relates in an environment where our climate is being challenged, or how the body is relating to something post-pandemic. But there's a really interesting kind of content connection by artists from a lot of different generations and cultural backgrounds that are focusing on this topic in one way, shape, or form. And that's not really a surprise given the world that we're living in at the moment. And I would also say technology. There's a theme going on right now about artists who are not necessarily working in technology. I mean, we are going to have Kenny Schachter. I have to give a shout out to Kenny, who's going to have his first solo show at Independent. It's going to be his independent debut at age 50. I'm delighted for him. And we will have NFTs, in that presentation with Alush Benias, who's his gallerist in Athens. They're wonderful. But we're also, and that's more of a classic, he's been working in new media since, 1990. But we're also looking at artists who maybe are working in painting and more traditional media, but they're being influenced by YouTube or social media or other forms of technological innovation, and they're commenting or critiquing that. And so we're going to see a lot of different new movements in art as a result of this week. And as a result, I hope this fair will open people's minds to a whole new generation of thought and those concerns.
Definitely. And I think that also then sort of begs the question, and I guess, Tony, this is for you, is the art fair an environment to support artists, or, who is it actually serving?
Well, first of all, I want to say I'm so enthused by and so excited to actually attend Independent. But listening to Elizabeth reminds me about the role of what Elizabeth brings to Independent, and that absolute perspective of not just being a dealer, but someone that recognizes that a fair needs to provide, and I'm using the word diverse in a broad stroke, a diverse opportunity for collectors, curators, and arts professionals to find, to see. And it's nice that we both, I hope I can add myself to this list, both will be able to offer in our next editions some galleries that I'm sure some people have not experienced, and artists that they have not seen. And so to answer your question, I think that is the role. That was the role of an art fair when it started in the the 70s, etc. That's the role as it is in 2022. If we can provide a place for that opportunity to explore, see, be touched by, provoked by the work of an artist, then we're doing our job. Because after all, distill it all down, that's why, or that is who we hope is the end beneficiary of what is all taking place. And that's the artists' work being supported, to provide that opportunity for them to continue creating for all of us to enjoy or be provoked by. And of course commerce has to take place. But that's just one piece of it, an important piece. But that is the role of an art fair, is the role of a gallery, is the role of many institutions, and I don't see that going away, nor should it. It's just one other important part of, I've used this word a lot, convening moments to allow work to be shown, explored, and an artist's vision to be either acquired or selected for an exhibition. It's why we are.
I love that. I love that. I just looked at the time also, though, so I think we have to shift to audience questions. But to jump off of that, somebody in the audience did ask a really fantastic question, which does deal with the marketplace, and I think it's really relevant. How do you see fairs evolving to meet the current marketplace, or do they need to?
Fairs are dinosaurs in the traditional sense. It's a 20th century model in the 21st century. I've been a proponent. I have done every art fair. I've sat on every art fair committee. The reason I started one was because I was shocked at how badly conceived they were and how they did undermine, in my opinion, what artists need in order to make work and show work successfully. That being said, there are things about the fair construct that work very, very well, because as time becomes more precious as a commodity, collectors need to really go to the heart of what's happening. And the art market, for living artists, in large part, is not a public market. It's not a transparent market. It's not a market where you can, open up your computer and look at how all these artists are doing in the market on a day-to-day, minute-to-minute basis, the way you can with your Fortune 500 companies. It's not that. And so it does rely on a lot of intelligence. So I think that fairs need to, and I think, Tony knows his audience and I know my audience, and we are building something that works for our audience. And that, when I look, we did the, I'll shout out for the New York Art Market Report that we did at the beginning of the pandemic with Claire McAndrew, which was the first time ever New York collectors were surveyed on their buying behavior and their interests. And it was fantastic, and it's on our website. If you want to go, just go to independenthq.com and click on the art market. It profiles our VIP collectors, where the ones living in New York. We just focused on that region. We focused on how they spend on average $759,000 a year on art. They have over 300 or 400 works in their collection, and they're buying across generations, and they're also buying across price points. So the New York market is very, very prioritizing of very well informed. The average collector that buys at independent goes to at least 30 exhibitions and fairs a year at museums. So these are people who are already really plugged in. So I'm not going to do an art fair that just feels very unvetted for them, right? I have to basically look for things with Matthew's very intelligent and talented guidance, look for things that add value to what these collectors already know and are already doing. And that is, so we are really a fair for the well-informed collector audience. We also don't trap people in aisles and booths, because for a fair like ours, it just doesn't work. We need sight lines. We need to think about it like a biennial. And also artists really need to feel it's something to make work especially for. Or gallerists need to look at it as an opportunity that gets 10,000 people of the right people looking at a show versus 500 in their own in their own gallery over the course of a month. And that's really super important. So we have to provide that opportunity through the context. And I've written a lot about context collapse at fairs. It was very much something that, was predicted, and I chronicled, and we stayed as far away from that as possible. And it's really interesting that now that we're all kind of coming up from the ground up again, people have really recognized and made really important changes in terms of how these fairs need to be done. I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. And there was something in there that I think really relates to the second question that, Tony, I would love for you to take, and then I'll let you two go. Is how has the audience changed? I'd love to, this person asked, I'd love to hear your comments on working face-to-face with this newer or different generation of collectors.
I think that is an important role of an art fair, and I'm going to go back to why we exist, or why they existed, and why they need to be nimble and grow. And that is, it is a new collector base. I'm just going to speak about Chicago, a new collector base that has become active and engaged with other fairs across the country and the world, and to bring an art fair to their front door, to our city, allows those collectors to also, all in their town, a chance to explore, and not just the galleries, but the artists that are being presented. And that new collector base wants to gather, they want to convene, they want to learn here, they want to learn from some of their mentors, those that are now active in the museums that weren't even 5-6 years ago, or now I have to say almost 11 years ago when I founded the fair. Those individuals have grown into roles in museums because they found the art fair in Chicago, got a little bit bit, and then explored and went to independent for the last many years. And that's how we grow, all of us. As you know, Kenny will be here for a great panel with NFTs. Like them or don't like them, they're not going away. That there is an audience that is engaged in so many different areas of what we want to call the art world, that I think it's our role to also be mindful and inclusive and make those offerings. So I hope that was not too rambling in perspective.
Quite the opposite, Tony. Thank you, and thank you both so much. One thing that I just would like to point out to the audience is that Tony and Elizabeth are good friends and confidants, and I think it really showed today. And so I just want to thank you two for bringing that energy and just cluing us into a little bit about what it's like to be in your position. And now that everyone probably has to go back to work, you two included, I'm not going to keep you any longer. And I just want to thank you two once again, and thank you to the audience.